Being live stream.
Okay, welcome everyone. My name is Sciortino. I am the director of SEA Junction, and SEA Junction, for those who still don't know it, is a public venue based here in Bangkok, which focuses on Southeast Asia. These past months, we have been doing quite a lot of events related to Myanmar, since we believe that the situation in Myanmar deserves more attention that is getting, not only for Myanmar itself, but also for the implication for the entire region. We have done this bi-weekly update since the coup, and now we are approaching 1 year of the coup. Unfortunately, it's lasting what optimistically some people had hoped for. So we are still confronted with the necessity of paying attention to the atrocities that are increasingly being committed, particularly this last month. It's not getting any better, and this will be told to us by our resource person, Debbie Stothard, who has kindly agreed to be with us again and discuss the situation in Myanmar. Debbie doesn't need much of an introduction. She's quite well known as someone who has dedicated her life to Myanmar and to Southeast Asia more generally, particularly about democracy in this region. Please, Debbie.
Thank you, Liam. Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining. I wanted to actually share, let me share my screen, just hang on a sec. Where are we? Here, okay. Are you seeing this? Yes? Leah, are you seeing this?
Yes.
Okay, fantastic. Now, you know, for a human rights activist, I really, people get kind of surprised that I'm very much into facts and figures and evidence. But, you know, I always like to back up my rhetoric or my rants with some data. And ACLED, the Young Conflict Location and Event Data Project, which is a university-based project, finally came through with the conflict figures for December 2021. So you can see in the first 11 months of the coup, we've actually seen 7,686 attacks on civilians or armed clashes that harmed civilians in Burma, Myanmar. What is quite shocking is that when we compare that data with similar incidents in the other top 4 countries on the agenda of the UN Security Council, we found that during September, October, November, and December, in the last 4 months of 2021, the attacks that happened in every part of Burma, Myanmar, was actually higher than Syria and Afghanistan combined. I've said it before, and I'm saying it again because whenever I say it to in different meetings, people are still surprised. But if you look at what's happened in December, you can see that we saw there's at least 885 incidents in which civilians were either targeted or harmed by the military regime and its militias, including the notorious Pew Sortie, which does actually assassinate a lot of activists. So when you look at this and you think, you know, in our brain space, we're so used to seeing international media and the international community banging on about what's going on in Syria, Afghanistan, Yemen, and Iraq, then I think it's important for us to understand that what's been going on in Burma, Myanmar is just as serious and critical, but perhaps even more critical to those of us who are living in the same neighborhood as Burma, Myanmar. It's more critical to those of us who have friends, relatives, colleagues, and loved ones, either in Burma right now or seeking shelter on its borders. I think if you look at the map, the conflict map measuring the number of incidents, for example, in Sagaing region, there was 1,598 such lethal incidents that targeted or harmed civilians. And you look at this conflict intensity, I was looking at that map and then I thought, well, it doesn't really give me a better, and I should look at it from a different point of view. I should look at it from the point of view of what is the population living in these areas, in these zones. When we say Sagaing 1,598, what does that mean for people in Sagaing if we measure the size of the population? You look here in Karenni State or Kayah State, there's a few, what seems to be quite a relatively small number. It's less than 300 incidents in Karenni State. But if you look at the fact that Karenni State has, I think, a third of or quarter of a million population, then you start to understand this is, this is actually quite serious. So here's another picture on. Now you can see on the left, I adjusted the number of conflict incidents against the size of the population in those respective regions and states. And now you can start to see that Karenni State is actually the most intensely affected given the size of the population. Remember, in previous updates, I talked about the fact that half the population of Karenni State had already been displaced by the junta's violence. And now you can start to see a different picture emerging, which is how, if you take into account the size of the population, you will see that most of the ethnic states, particularly states in the border areas, are disproportionately affected by the violence and the atrocity crimes committed by this illegal military junta, which also then begs the question that, if you thought the situation is so bad, it's getting worse, it's so sad, but there's nothing much we can do about it. Well, if you think that way, please look at this map. In Karenni State, for example, if you were living in Karenni State, you would be 26, if you were living in Karenni State, you would be 26 times more in danger of the illegal junta's military violence than if you were living in Rakhine State. So let's not forget Rakhine State last year, and in fact, Rakhine State since 2012 has actually essentially been a militarized zone because of the violence against Rohingya, including the genocidal campaign by the military junta against by the military against the Rohingya in 2017. So this place, until the coup started in February 2021, was actually considered one of the most conflict-ridden places. But then now, since the coup happened, if you were in Karenni State during February to December 2021, you were 26 times more likely or more at threat of military violence than if you were in Rakhine State. And after that, we start to see the situation quite bad. If you look at I'm trying to look at this, but also my little picture is actually blocking. Hang on, let me see. Can I I'm just trying to see whether I can get myself out of, okay, I'm hiding myself. Okay, so if you look at this map, you can see Karenni State Kia State is one of the most intensely affected given the size of the population. And then after that, we start to see that the states bordering India and China, and Karenni states on the border with Thailand, it's Kachin, Sagaing, and Chin are the second worst in terms of intensity per capita population. And then, of course, we see Magoi, Shan, which borders both China and Thailand, Karen, and Tanitai, Tavoy region, all bordering Thailand, is the third tier of intensity. So, what does this mean? If you remember what's happened, and sometimes it's hard to remember because we've had a pretty intense year. In Sagaing region, for example, we saw the Kani Township massacre in July, and then in December there was a Salingi Township massacre in which 11 civilians, including 5 children, were tortured and burnt alive. So torturing and burning alive civilians has been popping up as a kind of a strategy that's taking place in different parts of the country. In Chin State, Tantlang Township was under attack. 8,000 people fled. Homes, churches, CSO offices, and even the Save the Children office was destroyed. In January, so last week, a few days after I last spoke with you, they found the dead bodies of 10 people, 10 males, including a 13-year-old child in Matupi Township. Now, these people were abducted, used as human shields, and then killed. So, using civilians as human shields in times of conflict is definitely a war crime. But then all the massacres I'm talking about are either war crimes or crimes against humanity. They are atrocity crimes. And if you go into detail into each area, you will start to see that this is part of a pattern because ASEAN was slow to act, neighboring countries basically were more concerned about preventing refugees from entering their territory than about the violence that was raging in Burma and the impunity of the military junta. We can see that in some of these places, it actually just escalated and escalated. In Shan State, there was a clear example of where the junta forces burned rice and medical supplies meant for IDPs. And so, burning a source, the means of staying alive, the livelihood, and blocking humanitarian aid is definitely a very serious violation of international law. But also, this is not just one case, which has happened consistently over a long period. In Karenni State, which had the worst intensity, if you look in terms of the size of the population, by the third quarter of last year, half of Karenni State's residents were already displaced. And then on Christmas Eve, there was the Pruso Christmas massacre in which 37 people, including children, were tied and burnt to death. What was quite horrifying was listening to a briefing a few days ago and realizing that these 37 people, including the 2 national staff of Save the Children, are not the only ones who may have been killed. Local people have already complained and lodged reports with the Karenni resistance that nearly 50 other people are still missing from that convoy of IDPs trying to get to a safer place for Christmas. So we still don't know what's happened to those 50 people. And as each day passes, the family members who have reported these people missing are losing hope. They were hoping that their loved ones who were in that area are missing because they fled the violence and are in hiding. But it's already it's already nearly 3 weeks. So, you know, it's quite shocking and also quite sad to not know what's happened to these people. But and then, you know, that was not enough. You know, they'd already, the illegal junta had already attacked Karenni state, displaced half the population, perpetrated the Christmas massacre, and then if that wasn't enough, 2 weeks later, launching airstrikes on Loikaw, the state capital of Karenni, displacing another 40,000 people. So that people who thought they were safe to be living in downtown Loikaw, in basically the biggest city, the state capital, suddenly found themselves refugees fleeing for their lives because they were being subjected to airstrikes. Now, this is actually very significant, but it's also part of that progression. Remember last year we saw the military deploying battlefield tactics against people in cities, in urban areas, against protesters. They were being attacked in very traditional military fashion. So they fired artillery, grenades, fired weapons, including used snipers on people. And then now we start to see the military actually launching airstrikes on cities. And of course, in Karen State, we had the airstrikes and raids on Leke Kaw, which took up a lot of our attention in December. So I think, and some of the people who were displaced in Karen State were already displaced by military violence before the coup started. So I think we need to understand also that because the international community was a little complacent and dismissed these acts of military violence and incidents of extreme violence and impunity in recent years as, oh, give them time, like somehow time will help the military restrain itself and stop committing human rights violations. This didn't work. This actually encouraged and emboldened the military to do worse things. I just wanted to share these pictures of these portraits of the 10 people who were found murdered by the military, who were abducted in Matupi Township and used as human shields and then killed. And one of them is Putwi Dim, who is actually a media person who worked for Chin Independent Media. And the other one is Palena, the 13-year-old kid, the 13-year-old boy, who was also brutally killed, first abducted, used as a human shield, and murdered. So I'm sorry I couldn't find the names of the other people, but I hope that by looking at their pictures, we are reminded of the fact that what is happening, all these facts and figures, all these incidents that we're reading about happen to people who look like our friends, our relatives, our neighbors, people that we've worked with or met or shared meals with in recent years. That, you know, with the kind of violence that we are bracing ourselves for, if there's no military, if there's no Security Council action, if ASEAN still starts to differ about representation, about form rather than substance, we are going to see an escalation of violence, not just by the military, who is losing people as casualties, but also losing soldiers and police as defectors. But the fact that they're deploying also pew sortie and militias. Sorry, Leah, I can hear you. And also forcing the wives and children of soldiers to do military training is telling us that this junta is becoming increasingly desperate. And as they become more desperate, they're going to become more brutal and violent. And on the other hand, people at the community level, civilians, as they see this escalating brutality, they start to recognize that the stakes are even higher. So you either fight or flee. And this is the point now, as we reach 1 year after this junta started the coup, this coup which still is not complete. This is the point at which this is this turning point. Does the international community and ASEAN get its act together to intervene? Or are we actually going to see an intensification of this violence, because people on the ground have to decide whether to fight or flee, and many of them do not have the luxury of fleeing. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Debbie. We are now both in the spotlight. I think it's a very dark but realistic impression of the current situation. We are waiting for some question. In the meantime, to start, maybe you can say something about what has been the follow-up to Hun Sen visit to Cambodia.
Yeah,
and how different ASEAN countries have related to that.
Well, it's sometimes you have to. If the problem with ASEAN is that sometimes they behave like a bunch of petty teenagers. They'll be busy talking behind someone's back, and they will not actually express themselves clearly in public. But then, of course, they will be playing a lot of different power games. So we saw Cambodia, Hun Sen suddenly realized that he's become public enemy number 2 in Burma. After Min Aung Hlaing, we saw lots of protests around the country denouncing his visit. And then when he went home, the military, instead of giving him face, the military slapped him in the face. The junta slapped him in the face by jailing Aung San Suu Kyi for 4 years, I think 2 days after he went home. And then Hun Sen also desperately tried to get Japan to provide political influence, or to provide him with some political justification, saying, oh, Japan, come join my efforts. But at the same time, we saw some mild reprimands from Singapore and Malaysia, for example. And I think even Philippines hardening their position on Burma, because they suddenly realized that Hun Sen still didn't get the hint. So they needed to be able to make some statements independently about where they stood on Burma. And then Hun Sen, the big debut of Cambodia as the chair of ASEAN was to host this ASEAN retreat, ministerial meeting, this retreat. And then we suddenly heard, oh, people suddenly can't make it. Like all these ASEAN top representatives, all these ministers couldn't make it to the retreat for a number of reasons. But everyone understood it was because Hun Sen insisted at that point that the representative of the military junta would be part of the retreat. The junta, the illegal junta's fake foreign affairs minister. And so what we're hearing through the grapevine now is that Hun Sen, in order to be successfully host the first big deal of being chair of ASEAN, Hun Sen has had to dial back on having a junta representative if he wants to ensure that there's high level representation from different ASEAN countries. So it's kind of interesting because ASEAN's, some of the ASEAN states are basically saying it's men online or it's us. And Hun Sen is now being put in a position of having to make a choice. But I think the other thing that we need to be aware of is that Norway chairs the UN Security Council for the month of January. So now people are, different human rights activists are also keeping their eye on what Norway will do as the chair of the UN Security Council, given that Norway has two very big priorities this month and the Security Council. One is about women, peace, and security, the situation of women in conflict, and about the protection of civilians in situations of conflict. And if you looked at the presentation and the maps I gave you, it's pretty clear. Civilians are bearing the worst brunt of the junta's violence, not forced displacement or attacks that fail to harm civilians, but actual attacks that target civilians, including airstrikes and massacres. So I think this is something that a lot of focus will now be on Norway and the UN Security Council, because this is until the end of January. This is where a lot of focus is going to happen. In fact, tomorrow, Rafter Foundation, a Norwegian foundation, is actually hosting a webinar of what Norway can do at the Security Council. I'll be tweeting about that, but I'll probably, if you don't mind, Leah, I'll probably send some information for the links in the chat box, if you don't mind. And you're muted.
Actually, there was a question about that, so maybe you can tell us more about Norway and the role that they may wish to play, and also what we can expect also from the discussion tomorrow and in the forum. So it fits very well.
Okay, I read all your minds. I read your mind. Yes, you know, Norway from the very beginning, even from the late 80s, became quickly involved in the situation in Burma traditionally, because their honorary consul, Leo Nichols, who was kind of considered, was often referred to by Aung San Suu Kyi as Uncle Leo. He was jailed for owning a fax machine. Some of you who you know, if you are if you're our generation, you remember that we had such things as fax machines before email, and so Uncle Leo was jailed, was arbitrarily detained in prison for having a fax machine, because he was suspected of sending out faxes, which was human rights reports on. He was suspected of sending out messages on behalf of Aung San Suu Kyi to the international community. And poor Uncle Leo died in prison within a matter of days. So this is where, you know, people, sometimes human rights activists from different countries will say, well, yeah, Myanmar is bad, but at least it doesn't have a death penalty, or it hasn't used the imposed the death penalty. This is before February last year. And I'm going like, Uncle Leo Nichols' case it shows you don't have to be sentenced to death to die in the custody of the military, because the situation in the jail is so bad. This poor old man died within a matter of days. He only had like a 2-year jail sentence, or 3 years, and he was dead. So then that forced Norway to actually pay attention, because their honorary consul was died in custody, and Norway then, because Norway is also very keen on peace building, and their track record has been somewhat spotted over the years, whether it's Aceh or Sri Lanka or Burma. The thing is that Norway likes to think of itself. It's very proud of the fact that it's a small power with a big voice when it comes to peace building and peace processes, and also very strongly committed to women, peace, and security, and the protection of civilians. So this is Norway's stated, when different countries take turns to become the chair of the Security Council, they'll say, oh, our priorities are this and this and this. So Norway didn't surprise us. They said they were concerned about protection of civilians and women, peace, and security. And lo and behold, Burma is a burning issue, which checks those boxes. So the challenge is whether Norway is willing to use its muscle to actually act according to its priorities when it comes to Burma. Let me look, while you're asking the next question, let me look up the information for yes, have to.
To complete that, I mean, what would be your expectation about Norway, whether indeed would be willing or not to get involved? Now, there is another question. We recently connected with Rohingya refugees in Aceh. How do you think we can pressure Asian country, Bangladesh, and the international community to do more to protect refugees? This is from Galu, from AJAR. The rest is Debbie sending a message. So these two, maybe these two, and then maybe a third question about the 1 year approaches. And like you said also in the presentation, one could get as conclusion, we cannot do much. I mean, there is not much that can be done. This 1 year is going worse than before. And anyway, something that people in Myanmar have to do by themselves because they can be the only one that can do it. So where leave this us thinking about the year to come?
Sorry, Leah, can you please repeat the first question?
The first question was about the Norway, like you
said, okay, I answered that, okay.
I mean, you answered, but you left a little bit unfinished. What will they be willing to play this role of peace mediator, which they have played in various other conflicts, including in Aceh, right? But I don't know if the scale is the same as what we are talking now.
I think, with the peace building stuff, there was already a lot of criticism from different ethnic communities on the ground in Burma, but particularly women, that the way Norway made financial and material contributions to the peace process, the way it was implemented was actually politically corrupt, because it did not focus on halting impunity for violence against civilians. In fact, if you look at what was happening during between 2011 to 2021, in that 10 years, while Yangon, where Rangoon and Mandalay, these central urban centers, and Naypyidaw were booming, we also saw a lot of resource-based conflicts happening in ethnic areas, and the resource-based conflicts, including grabbing land from people who needed it to grow food to feed themselves, and violence that displaced people, actually prolonged the impact of decades of conflict. So there were these like Lake Call, for example, became a focus of a lot of outrage because a lot of INGOs, Lake Call was actually supposed to be set up to be a model peace village as part of the peace process. So what we saw was this investment in model villages that somehow, if you cooperated, you got some land back, and there was some kind of local development. But then this was happening and happening at the same time where lots of great big stretches of land, swaths of land was being taken. I mean, how, if you talk about peace process, how can you have a peace process without reflecting and engaging and working for peace for the Rohingya, who are subjected to genocide, who before 2017 were already subjected to what ALTSEAN called a slow burning genocide. When we came out in 2006 and say, hey, did you notice the situation of Rohingya in relation to the UN Convention for the Punishment and Prevention of Genocide? So, all of those elements were already there. If you looked at the Convention to Prevent and Punish Genocide and look at what was going on with the Rohingya, even before it, during the 70s, the 80s, and the 90s, it was already a slow burning genocide. It was the basis of a genocide. It was not happening as quickly as it happened when people say it's the genocide of 2017, I would say, yes, it's the genocide of 2017. But what was happening before then was a slow burning genocide. So I think, it's, in hindsight, it is possible to be a little bit cynical about what different countries who claim to be to have feminist foreign policies, like Sweden, for example, and Norway wanted to be the great peace builder, the universal peace builder, but they still did not address and did not listen to the voices of women on the ground who were basically saying, you've got to start protecting civilians. The peace process was politically corrupt because it kept out women and affected communities. What it was basically the leaders of combatants, the combatant leaders, the Tatmadaw, and the various ethnic leaders basically making deals about business opportunities in return for a cessation of violence. So that was not peace. It might have been a slowdown in fighting because people were too busy making money, but it wasn't peace. Protection of refugees, and going back to, it's up to the people in Burma. Look, I remember in 1997, okay, this is like me in my rocking chair, grandma. In 1997, we were in Manila when Philippines was chairing ASEAN. And I think the chair at that time was the Foreign Minister of the Philippines, Domingo Siason. And of course, they always say this, it's up to the people of Myanmar to determine their own fate. And I say, like, yes, they did. In 1990, they voted out the military, but you're siding with the military, not with the people. So what are you talking? In 2020, the people voted for the NLD. They voted for the NLD because they didn't want a military-linked party like the USDP to take over. The vote for the NLD was as much a vote against the USDP, the military-aligned party. And, they decided, and they're still deciding. It's easy to say it's up to the people of Myanmar to change the situation. Yeah, but they're being subjected to airstrikes, to attack helicopters, to artillery fire, to gunshots, to bombs, and they don't have very much to defend themselves with. So are you saying let's just sit back and let them fight it out until it's the last human being standing in the country? Because then it's easy for us. We can just watch it like it's a very like it's another action movie. These people got nothing to do with us. They're suffering, got nothing to do with us. Or, there's a basic concept of solidarity. And by the way, all those people who say it's up to people in Myanmar to figure it out, they were the ones rushing in to make money when the economy was booming. They were rushing in to invest. They were rushing in to try and get their hands on natural resources, cheap land, cheap labor. And then when it's no longer profitable, they're all just sitting back. They didn't say at that time, let's leave it up to the people of Myanmar to develop their own economy and get rich on their own. No. But when it comes to human rights violations, atrocity crimes, let's hands off. Oh, we can't do very much. Well, there's a lot you can do. And that goes back to our friend from AJAR. We, at the very least, protect refugees, provide shelter. And at this time, it's not just people trying to find shelter and food. It's also protection, health protection, because all this violence is happening in the middle of a COVID pandemic. And if you think Omicron and Delta is back, we still don't know what's coming out of Burma. Because this military has prioritized killing people than COVID vaccinations. Okay? So, and they've weaponized COVID. So at least think about the asylum seekers, refugees and migrants and stateless people from Burma who are already in your country. We do have an obligation to make sure that they're not forced back and that they're not made even more vulnerable, because the moment you drive people from Burma in your country further underground is the longer you're prolonging so many threats against human security. So it's if they are in trouble, you are in trouble. So you do need to make sure, like for very, very basic self-interest, if you are serious about addressing this COVID pandemic within your national boundaries, then you need to ensure that asylum seekers, migrants, and other stateless people from Burma from Burma, for that matter, from any country, for that matter, have access to basic healthcare and vaccination. If not, we are going to go down the way of Singapore, where Singapore was self-congratulating itself earlier last year in 2020 as the best practice, the successful story of COVID prevention. And then they had a giant wave because they forgot the fact that they were forcing migrant workers who cleaned their homes and made their food and fueled their cars. They forgot that they were forcing these migrants to live under very crowded conditions. So I think, we do need to think about that. And there's so much more that we can do. We can give our respective governments a kick up the butt because they should be doing more, whether it's refugee and civilian protection here or in making some cross-border aid happen. And there is no excuse for dragging our heels on cross-border assistance. You saw from that map, the places which have been subjected to disproportionate violence are also the places which have traditionally been excluded from social services such as health and education. So, and they are all along in Burma's borders with China, with India, with Bangladesh, with Thailand. So we can already see cross-border assistance is going to be key. And we have no excuse by saying, oh, we don't have money. The international financial institutions like World Bank, IMF, International Monetary Fund, and Asian Development Bank actually put aside $820 million for COVID economic recovery for Myanmar in 2021. That money has been frozen. That money should be used for cross-border aid because that is not going to be necessary for dealing with the humanitarian crisis, the emergency in Burma, but also it's going to be something of an economic lifeline to sustain local economies and give people the means to take care of themselves. So that's and what are we doing? Not sanctioning Myanmar oil and gas enterprise. This is the biggest cash cow for the military junta. Why are people sending them money? You know, Total Energies, this French oil company, which is one of the biggest sources of individual sources of revenue for the junta, previously argued that they needed to keep on paying revenues to the military so that they could keep the lights on in Burma. That people in Rangoon needed electricity. Well, what's happened is that in the past year, people started boycotting. They had a strike to not pay taxes and the bills to any institution controlled by the military. So the electric company, which was under the control of the junta, has actually been starved of revenues because people refuse to pay their electricity bill. And even if the electricity got cut, they don't care. They will still not pay. And in fact, what we've seen in the past few weeks is soldiers being sent to households saying, pay your electricity bill or we will kill you. That's how bad it is. So people are actually refusing to give any revenue to the military. People in Burma, even though they're being threatened with jail or death for refusing to pay money to the junta. And here we are outside the country, very slow to impose targeted economic sanctions on military businesses. It's not going to hurt France if Total put their money in escrow into a trust account. Basically, they're still paying the revenues, the taxes, but not giving it to the military. They're holding it in trust until the civilian government is able to claim it. Other companies have done it in the past in situations of conflict. It's not going to hurt them, but it definitely will hurt people in Burma. So when we say it's up to the people of Burma, yes, they have a role, but it's not up to you to keep giving this illegal military junta money. It's up to you to stop feeding this junta. Sorry, too much of a rant.
Little bit of rant, but still quite useful. And we are clear that the international community, international people like us can do something. It's not that we have nothing to do. I think we can still highlight the situation, which we still try to do also with this update. You can boycott or push your government to boycott or simply don't buy products from the company that are still in Myanmar. And of course, put pressure for the issue of refugees and relief. Refugee was in particular related to the Rohingya situation, which after so many years, they are still in Bangladesh. And the question is, what can be done? You know, I mean, are these people to have to stay in this camp forever? I mean, we have the example of Thailand, of course, where the camps are still there after 30 years. I mean, is this the future of the Rohingya community for, in the case of Bangladesh? I mean, do we expect they cannot go back? It's clear. They have tried now, again, there were boats going to Indonesia. Indonesia initially refused totally to have it ashore, then later seemed to have changed their mind, but it's not very clear also what is happening with them. So I think you can maybe briefly tell us more about the Rohingya situation, particularly the one that are in the refugee camp and that they are trying to go out, also because some have been moved to an island, right? And for it's sure is not an ideal situation. And the last question is again about the role of ASEAN in this situation beyond UNSEN? Are they going to split between mainland Southeast Asia, as some are speculating, and peninsular Southeast Asia? Since it seems that indeed the country of mainland Southeast Asia are more supportive of the junta and UNSEN than not Indonesia, Philippines, Singapore, and Malaysia. So is this going to be the division? What is your view? We don't have much time, so
yeah, I got 8 minutes.
Short. Yeah, okay.
The thing is that there are still Rohingya inside the country and Muslims in the country who have been involved in this movement and who get the double threat of being targeted because of their identity and because of their activism. At the same time, let's not forget, when the coup started in 1st of February, one of the first gestures of solidarity came out of the Cox's Bazar, out of the Rohingya refugee camps. And you will keep on seeing people very actively expressing their solidarity with communities subjected to the type of impunity and atrocity crimes that the Rohingya were subjected to. That's one point. And sorry, Basancha is still not a solution. If you look at what's happening, if you look at people who are affected by conflict, their priority is food, shelter, and communications, being connected to the outside world, to be able to get information, share information, and stay connected to family, loved ones, and the outside world. So if you cannot guarantee safety and safe access to communications, then you really are not listening to people's needs. So I think we have to understand in this day and age, access to communication is as much a human right as access to food and shelter. So if we are going to solve the Rohingya situation, one of the good things that I can say is that since February the 1st, and in fact, again, more recently, seeing young people, especially young people from Burma, Myanmar, as part of the Milk Tea Alliance and other forums, is reminding everyone that this is not just about a fight to reverse the coup. This is a fight for transformation of the country based into a federal union that is based on equity and equality, of inclusion, which means that if our friends win this fight, we are in a better position. We have a stronger hope, a stronger possibility for a durable solution where the Rohingya are concerned. So I think we do need to understand why we need to support this movement, and we need to support the progressive young people who are pushing for the national unity government and other political stakeholders to ensure that any new constitution, any new policies and structures and arrangements include the Rohingya and other minority groups. So this is something we need to understand. And on the other hand, too, we also need to understand that some communities, some people have been subjected to such serious atrocities and are so deeply traumatized that they should have the option of deciding where they want to stay, whether they're resettled to a third country or whether they stay in Bangladesh or the countries where they're currently located. And let's not forget, when you talk about ASEAN, Leah, you and I, Malaysian, Indonesian, we know this concept of Nusantara. Basically, the archipelago that forms ASEAN, that immigration and national boundaries are relatively new concepts in the history of our region. Our region thrived because of voluntary movements of people. Our cultures grew because of movements of people. So inevitably, if we are not to fossilize as a region, not to stagnate, we need to welcome new faces and new communities into our community. This is how we grow and how we thrive. So this whole idea of this is my national boundary, this is my passport, this is what my immigration department says, that's actually really not just harmful to people, to our community, the so-called ASEAN community, it's also harmful to us in terms of economic, cultural, social development. So I think we do need to understand that we cannot fossilize our neighborhoods. We actually, in order to grow, to keep on growing, we need to welcome each other. And when we talk about the split of ASEAN, when was ASEAN actually united? One of the things is that one of the things that really, really exposed first was the fact that ASEAN economies are competing against each other, despite the free trade area, despite ASEAN this move towards ASEAN economic integration. The reality is that ASEAN economies were competing against each other for similar markets, and you can see the made in Malaysia car versus the made in Indonesia car versus the assembled in Thailand car. You know, all this kind of fake nationalism was actually harmful. When we look at what happened in the region because of COVID, that really showed that ASEAN was not cohesive. In fact, ASEAN was not even willing to take leadership. There was a vacuum of leadership when it came to the COVID response in our region, which is why we don't even have enough bubbles happening. You know, this idea of, oh, we're going to have an ASEAN bubble, we're going to move safely to, have we're going to support each other's tourism industry and have holidays and trips. Oh, that just hasn't happened because there's so much imbalance, so much inequity, and so much reluctance to really share in this region. So ASEAN, I mean, Burma has always been a source of contention before, in the 90s, even after they allowed Burma into the membership, it affected ASEAN's relationship with the EU and other dialogue partners, and that will continue to happen. Perhaps, I think, if we really wanted ASEAN to wise up and grow up, they do need to understand that when it comes to human security, when it comes to sustaining this region, there has to be some principles. We still haven't transformed ASEAN from that informal club of dictators to a rules-based organization. And that's why we'll continue to be disunited. And that's why individual ASEAN countries will have more meaningful relationships with individual dialogue partners and not as a body. So don't worry, ASEAN was never united to begin with, and it won't be united for a long time. But what we need to do is to make sure that individual ASEAN states who actually think rationally will understand it's in their interest to work with the Security Council and other dialogue partners to stem this escalating violence in Burma, because it's going to hurt us all. This is a bomb in our front yard. Actually, it's not a bomb. It's a collection of bombs. It's so we have to be really, really careful now.
You made your point. So we have to continue to remain engaged. Don't let inertia overwhelm us. And for sure, please do continue to follow our update to keep informed. We have also 2 events for those in Bangkok, which I want to mention. One is, I think, a fantastic exhibition, but of course I am very biased. It is the story of the coup, the 1 year of the coup told through artwork from artists from Myanmar and beyond, through 13 boards that really make clear what has happened in Myanmar. Extremely clear for all kinds of people, even for those who don't know much about Myanmar. So please do come to the Bangkok Arts and Culture Center. There will be, we just opened yesterday this exhibition, and will go on until the end of the month, just to end before the coup. the anniversary of the coup. And the second event will be at the FCCT, the Foreign Correspondents Club of Thailand. There will be a fundraising event on Monday, next Monday, and the opening, the launching, the relaunching of the exhibition that SEA Junction has held on the role of women in the democracy movement in Myanmar, particularly during the Spring Revolution. So please participate in this event, continue to be part of our community. Thank you again, Debbie, for this spirited, as usual, presentation. And I hope to thank you to all the people that have attended, also those who have followed on Facebook and YouTube. Thank you very much, and see you to the next in 2 weeks' time.
Thank you. I've just posted a Twitter thread on the chat box, and it's by Edith Miranti. She just launched a thread 2 hours ago on the history of Burma and ASEAN on Twitter. And yes, please, please go to the BACC and go to FCCT if you can make it. It's this artistic expressions that we need to feed our souls and our spirits as we keep on supporting this struggle in the next in the months ahead. The coup is not over. It's not over until the fat lady sings, and I'm not even humming yet.
We don't know who is the fat lady here, but we'll leave it open. Okay, but just to say, actually, on food, actually, I forgot to mention on the 22nd at 4:30, there will be a panel discussion with Myanmar canapés. So we finish with food. So not cooked by me, but cooked by some people who really know how to cook Burmese food. So please do come. We will be discussing about art and revolution. Thank you very much, and see you again in 2 weeks' time. Bye-bye.